Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Legal Lunch Bite. This time, episode. I don't have the episode number. We typically have the episode number at the top of the screen. I think 14. But in any case, delighted to have my colleague Shannon Brandao with me today. Shannon, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Very excited to get to talk to you. I don't get to talk to you guys much. We're all so busy, so this is nice.
I agree. And let's. Why don't before anything else, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I have a news feed on LinkedIn called China Boss. I also have a newsletter on Substack called China Boss. So a lot of people know me from that, where I just essentially sum up the news. I present all the developments that's happening in geopolitics and U.S. Regulations, on export controls and things like that. Currently, I live in Portugal. I live in Porto, and I'm getting ready to move to a smaller town on the Silver Coast, which is about an hour south. We just bought a house there. I've been in Europe for think 5 years. I came to Europe in 2018 as a student, an LLM student at the University of Leuven. That's in Belgium. That's near Brussels. It's KU Leuven, Catholic University of Leuven. I did a 1-year program in European Union business and international law at KU Leuven. And right as I was graduating, lo and behold, the pandemic broke out. And so I had planned to stay in Belgium and maybe work in Brussels. I was hoping to find an internship or a job in Brussels, but that didn't work out. And I began the news feed and the newsletter after that. So I've been quite busy. I've been here for about 6 years, and we're just now getting around to purchasing our own home in Europe, which is sort of what we're going to talk about here. And I hope I can help folks with some information if they're interested in moving to Europe and purchasing a home.
That's right, and that there we'll have to have you on at another time so that we can talk about China and your work with that topic. But today we're going to be focusing on Europe, and sure enough, you have been working on a series of blog posts on the topic of buying a home in Europe. So I think it's pretty obvious that because of your own experiences in this field, that's probably part of the motivation for writing about this. But is there anything else that is prompting you to address this topic?
Well, you sort of hit the nail on the head when I began to look at real estate here. There wasn't a lot of information geared towards foreigners about the differences of buying, between, say, the U.S. and Portugal in looking for and purchasing a home. And I'm very fortunate that I have a Portuguese husband. So my husband is a dual citizen. He's both Portuguese and American. So he could help do some of the research, local research, and I tried to figure out the pitfalls or the things that you could get caught up in and that you could spend all your money on if you weren't careful. So I did a lot of research because I'm kind of a careful person. But I thought that why let all that go to waste? I think about that time, a lot of Americans were moving to Portugal. They still are. And I hear people around me. I know Americans in my neighborhood that are thinking of buying homes. And I was sharing the information that I had with them. And they were finding it quite useful. And so I thought, I might as well make this public. I think I could help explain a lot of things. We also looked at buying in Belgium. We came very close to buying in Belgium, and before we decided to move to Portugal. So I had done the research there too. You have to keep in mind, Europe is a continent. So these are different countries. It's not. There are similarities between, like say the U.S. states and the member states of Europe. But there are a lot more differences because you're dealing with countries. And so they are, even though European Union law applies to many commercial transactions, there's still a wide range of business deals that are local and geared and controlled by local law. So there can be a lot of differences across Europe. Wide variety of laws. And so what I wanted to do with the blog post is, in the beginning, I was just going to write one post, and I realized that it's not going to do the whole topic justice, because it's extremely complex. You've got immigration issues. You've got because foreigners they have to show different things to be able to purchase real estate than a local will have to present. You've got tax issues that are going to be different. You've got inheritance issues. You've got construction standards. So it actually is very, very complex. As I was researching it, I realized that this is something that really required almost a book, and I didn't have the time to write a book, so I thought maybe I'll just do a series instead.
Which you can then collate into a book.
Maybe, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's see.
You bring up a very important point, which I think has implications beyond real estate, but that is the fact that Europe, despite the fact that the European Union exists, it is still a continent made up of independent nations. We will, very often you'll hear people talk about, well, the U.S., Europe, and Japan, are doing this, and sure enough, in some ways, Europe can be treated as a unit, but clearly there are many other instances where it's just not appropriate. I was actually listening to an interview yesterday with a Spanish YouTuber, let's just say, who had recently moved to Andorra. There's a bit of a trend of certainly Spaniards moving up to Andorra for tax reasons, and he was. And the person interviewing him was on the same boat. They also moved from Spain to Andorra. And they were talking about all of the different hurdles that they have to jump through. And that struck me because, and of course, Andorra is not a member of the EU, right. But nonetheless, you would think that, it would be a relatively easy process. And maybe it is in comparison to going to a country further afield. But even in that case, right, moving to a neighboring country with, strong ties to the country from where you're moving can still be an issue. So that's a very good point. But let me before we keep digging deeper into this. So let's talk about this trend, specifically Americans going to Europe, either moving there or maybe purchasing properties as an investment. I imagine that COVID accelerated trends that were already going on. What are you seeing in this regard? I mean, what is driving this interest on the part of Americans to go to Europe? Is it a purely anecdotal thing, or do you think there's something more to it? And where are they going?
No, the EU actually has at the EU level, I think it's the Commission has some statistics on all the different member states and the immigration patterns, and so it's not an anecdotal thing at all. There is a little bit, I think, of a hype, though. There's a bit of an exaggeration as to how many Americans might be moving. Americans have always been coming to Europe. They've always been moving to Europe. In some regard, there was a fringe movement at different times in history, and then other, perhaps uber wealthy people have made property investments here. I think the trend now is really ordinary folks have the resources, whether that's savings or income from a sale of of their home, or income from income from a online remote working position that allows them, in the freedom to do what they've already always wanted to do. And many of them are coming to Europe. They're not all coming to Portugal. Portugal gets a lot of hype. There are increases in the number of Americans going to Scandinavian countries, for example. And of course, they're going to Spain and they're going to France. These are increases. There's not a flood. And even I'm really surprised here because there's a local spin that's a little bit negative. I think there were some documentaries that were made about how the Americans were coming in and driving up the real estate prices, and there really just isn't enough Americans to do that. That documentary is not really based in fact. It's not based on the number of people that the immigration authorities here in Portugal say are coming. So there are different reasons for that, and I can talk about them later. But there's certainly an uptick, absolutely an uptick. And yes, I think that uptick did start around the pandemic. It just became easier. People give all sorts of reasons for coming, So they say that they want to travel more. They say that they're tired of living in the U.S. and the toxic political culture and that sort of thing. So they say that they want to buy a cheaper home, and that is in many cases possible because, depending on where you are in Europe. I mean, in Portugal, the housing has gone up tremendously in the cities, but it's still affordable, when you compare it to California or New York or even South Florida or some of the major cities in the US. So there are a lot of reasons that people are coming, but now they have the means to come. In addition to having the income and the flexibility, they have a number of visa options that weren't always available before. The member states have always been competing for, the tourist dollar. And during COVID, they kind of got smart and they said, well, what if we, offer residential visas to digital nomads? Or what if we offer golden visas to folks that want to come? So they began to compete. Different member states began to compete with their visa offerings. And they're changing all the time. It's really hard to keep up. Portugal's has changed tremendously in the past year alone. The golden visa, for example, is still available, but it's being phased out. That's an EU thing, by the way. So the Brussels doesn't really like the golden visa scheme because it allows, bad actors from certain warmongering countries to kind of slide into Europe, and while they support the chaos in their own countries. So Brussels has been hammering down on the golden visas, and I think the goal, they want them to be phased out. So they're putting pressure on the member states, but the member states, there's still a wide berth of jurisdiction that they have over immigration and over local issues. So it's a little bit of a controversy, but if you're looking to come in on a golden visa, I think you better move faster, sooner, rather than later, because I'm not so sure that they'll be around in Europe for the next, for longer than another year or two. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Word to the wise.
I'm sorry, but that is not to say that there are so many different types of visas to come in to Europe. Golden visa, for those of you who don't know what a golden visa is, it's just a pathway to citizenship for usually a lump sum investment, whether that investment is in real estate, which was a common way that folks got EU citizenship and residency in the past. But you can also invest in, fund art programs. You can fund. It depends on each country. Each country has a different scheme of things that you can invest in. So the golden visa, even though that's being phased out, there's still a tremendous number of visas that would allow you to come into Europe as a non-citizen, but as a legal resident, and then perhaps after usually 5 years, but not always, you might be eligible for citizenship.
Excellent. So before we sign off, I mean, invariably these conversations, we could go on for a long time, but I want to finish by asking you the following question. Let's say you have an American who's gone through the process of buying property here in the United States. They understand the U.S. complexities associated with buying a home, but they're interested in Europe from their perspective, right? From the perspective of someone who is more or less familiar with the purchase of real estate in general. Going to Europe, what would be, what would you say, one or two or three things that they should be, that will probably surprise them, or that they'll have to sort of adjust to if they were to test the waters of becoming homeowners in Europe?
I am going to speak from my own experience because we have just concluded. I guess 6 weeks ago we concluded our real estate purchase, and we are in the process of fixing a lot of things that we didn't know need fixed. So I think I didn't take my own advice. We didn't get a building inspection because we knew we wanted to live in the area, and we felt we sort of kicked the tires a little bit on the house ourselves. I think what would surprise you, so the general flow of the purchase process is similar. You go and you shop for a home, and then usually you use a real estate agent, and then you guys negotiate a price, and then you come to an agreement on the price, and some contracts are signed, and that sort of thing. I think what would surprise you is that again, Europe is a continent, and there are different levels of legal protection. There are different construction standards. There are different habits, cultural habits in the way that homes are shown to you, and what information is disclosed and what information doesn't have to be disclosed. Sorry, there's a lot of differences. I'm going to drink some water.
Sure. No worries.
Sorry, I got hot. There was a lot of differences in in law enforcement. So if the homeowner, for example, wasn't quite ready to move out after the home was sold, he might actually stay in the property beyond his legally allotted time to do so. And you might have a hard time kicking him out. And this actually happened to us. We didn't have a terribly, I expected worse, but I think it took us 3 weeks to get him completely out.
Okay. All right. That's not something you'd expect here if you're buying a home, right? I mean, if you're renting an apartment out to someone, then yeah, there could be issues with that. But that's interesting. That counts for sure.
Right. There's a lot of things. So when I write, I try to sort of weave in my own experiences into each blog post, and I mention anything and everything that I think people will find interesting, and that I think that will be helpful to folks. So I urge you, if you're really interested in buying a home in Europe, or if you're just interested in what's going on in Europe from a real estate point of view and an immigration point of view, then check out the blog. About every week or 2 weeks or so, I come out with a new series, a new post in the series, and you can get a lot more information and some of my personal experiences from there.
Well, I will echo that recommendation. Be sure to check out Shannon's posts on the subject. With that, Shannon, thank you so much for joining us. And to everyone else, be sure to join us next week for another edition of the Legal Lunch Bite. Take care, everyone.
See you later.